Hi, I'm Benjamin Mac Jackson, founder of the World War II Veterans History Project. I started this project in the summer of 2015 with the goal of providing knowledge and inspiration to my generation so they can better appreciate and understand what these heroes went through. My mission is to preserve the memories of the greatest generation. In this story, World War II veteran Robert Dickinson, a gunner's mate third class in the United States Navy, shares his experiences while serving aboard the legendary submarine USS Queenfish. He is the last surviving member of the original crew and vividly recalls his battle patrols. After accidentally sinking a ship, granted safe passage, his commander was court-martialed. His exciting story of life below the sea will keep you on the edge of your seat.
My name is Bob Dickinson. I am a gunner's mate third class from the U.S. Navy on the submarine Queenfish and the Remora. I enlisted as I graduated high school. My mother signed the sheet because I was underage. I was 17 years old when I joined. And I went to boot camp in Newport, Rhode Island. And then at that time, from the graduating boot camp, I was assigned to the local fire department at the training base because I was a volunteer at home when I joined, before I joined the Navy. And with that, we started training the boots from the recruits from the Navy base and in firefighting prior to them being assigned to a ship. And going through this training 3 or 4 times a day with all the heat from the fires that we had to put out with the recruits, it got to me a little bit. I lost a lot of weight because of the heat and everything else. So I figured the only way to get out of that, I volunteered for the submarines duty, knowing that they needed men, and I figured that would be an easy way of getting out of what I was doing, and at the same time doing something a little more true to me. That's why I joined the Navy. Before I got out the subs, I thought about where can I go where I can not suffer like these Army people, the Navy, the Marines and the artillery battalions and with the Army and the Marine Corps. Those guys, when they had a fight, they saw bloodshed. And I didn't particularly care for that. I guess there was some feeling that I had, if I wanted to go, I wanted to go quick. I didn't want to be in an aircraft and shut down and see myself going. I didn't want that to happen. I thought if I was going to go, I wanted to go quick. And I didn't want any memories of after with being wounded or any of that part. And I just felt if I'm going to give my life, this is the way I'm going to give it. After graduation at the submarine school at New London, Connecticut, I was assigned to the new construction at at Portsmouth, or Kittery, Maine, as it's known, at the Navy Yard where they built the submarines. And I was assigned to the Queenfish during her building period, and at the commissioning. And in early 1944, late 43, we were assigned to the Pacific duty, and we were on our way to Pearl Harbor. It was our main base in the Pacific, and that's when we got started on our first war patrol. Everybody thought it was horrible, and once you get on, it was just like another routine of the food was the best. That all kept us happy, and we had a good chef, and we just felt all like all brothers, and we all got along, because if you didn't get along, you didn't last too long as far as being on the crew. And we just all got along very well, and it proved by that when we had these reunions, most of us were there, and we still were very close together. And even some of the new men that were assigned differently at different times, they became one of us. And it was just like brotherly, that was more so than in real life. A gunner's mate was what they called a right arm rate, which was mostly seamanship, and of course with the gunpowder that we had a 4-inch howitzer on each sub with a couple of 20-millimeter guns and some small arms and whatever, which we were more or less in charge of that respect, besides doing our regular seamanship duty, and which was concerned about being lookouts on the bridge and certain other acts during the battle stations. I was commended for our first war patrol for spotting more enemies than the radar did, and I was awarded my first medal for that, and which I was proud, because I was one of the youngest guys on the boat, and was able to do something. We were involved in rescuing English and Australian prisoners of war that were at what they called the WWII. And the Clay Blair, after the war, I think it was in the late 60s or the 70s, wrote a book, The Return from the WWII, of which I have a copy of it. And I was interviewed quite intensely with Clay Blair for the writing of that book. Of course, that's why my name is in there a couple of times. But one of our submarines did not know what was on the Japanese ships, that the convoy that they picked up, of which there was 2 or 3 of them that sunk these ships, and found out that there were the prisoners of war that were being transported from the WWII to the mainland in Japan. And due to some of the weather conditions, a typhoon, what they call a hurricane in the sea, was coming up, and we were called to help and rescue as many as we can from the ship that was lost. And we picked up 18 of them just one day prior to the typhoon. And my parents never knew what I was doing. They didn't know I was in the Pacific. They didn't know where I was, except the fact that I went to submarine school. And they got a letter, I'm not too sure, about a year or so after, well, less than a year, from one of the people in England, one of the prisoners that were rescued, that we rescued, and they got a letter from his sister-in-law telling us how grateful they were of me, and that was the only time my parents knew where I was, what I was doing. And the letter was an invite for me whenever I get to England to look them up, because they were so grateful that I was involved with the rescue. We got a Presidential Unit Citation for that war patrol, which was our very first. We were within the top 10 submarines of the whole fleet that had so much tonnage to our credit that we sunk, and which was including an aircraft carrier that was going from the Philippines to the mainland. They were transporting aircraft to protect the Japanese islands. And we sunk that, and we were quite active. All in all, with 5 war patrols, we've sunk a total of around 18 ships to our credit, and we got credit for 5 war patrols that were considered successful. After, I think, our second war patrol, we went to Guam, and one of my buddies on the boat was, we all went to a creek up in Guam to go fishing, swimming. And Billy there was a lot of natives by, and he was showing off his diving skills, and he didn't realize the shallow of that water. He broke his neck, and he was sent back bedridden for the rest of his life. And he's one guy I really missed. He was in New Jersey, and I went to his funeral, and that was in 2-3 years after the war. I was in touch and visited him periodically, and till he passed away. We thought he was the best. If we didn't have confidence in him, he couldn't get the crew that would help him the way they did. And we had more confidence in him. We liked him. He was just like a brother to us, or maybe a father, but he was just as young as most of us. He was just one of us. And also, because we were on the Wolfpack with the Barb, and the Barb, their skipper, got the Medal of Honor. He sunk a railroad train. I put that briefly. The Barb was involved with one of our patrols that they sent two rafts ashore, and they put explosives on a railroad tracks, and they blew up a train which was carrying troops. And he got the Medal of Honor for that. And at our reunions, it was like two ships in one, because the Barb, the crew of the Barb and the crew of the Queenfish, we were so attached of going on these runs together and working together, and we just felt like we were all in one. But they got the Medal of Honor, all he did, the skipper did, for what he did. And we can say that we were the leader of that group, the Queenfish, the Barb, and the Bakuda. And we were the flagship of that Wolfpack. We had 60 men and 7 officers. That was our crew. We were all like brothers. The Ala Maru, they send out messages that they have a ship called the Ala Maru that was leaving from a certain area to the to Japan mainland, and they were supposed to be bringing supplies to help the American prisoners in Japan. That's what they said, but the evidence proved differently. But that had nothing to do with the sinking, because when we sighted the ship, we didn't see it at all. The fog was so thick and so intense that the only way we could see the ship was on radar. And with that, they were doing maneuvers like a man of war would be, and it certainly didn't. They were supposed to have their lights all lit so they could be identified, and they were supposed to be on a straight course, not zigzagging course. And they were just doing the opposite. They had no lighting on, which we could have seen the glow in the fog if they did have their lights on. And they were zigzagging to a certain amount, and on our radar and the way we saw it, it was just like a man of war avoiding any meeting with any of the enemy. I was on the bridge at that time, and we went to battle stations, and we just could not see anything. With our glasses, our binoculars, and what have you, it's just impossible to see that ship. So they figured the officers of the Queen figured that this could not be the Ala Maru. It's got to be warship evading anything that could happen to her. So we fired a couple of fish torpedoes, and we just hit it with one shot and it disappeared completely. We went back as it got lighter, and we found a lot of bales of rubber, titanium, and all kinds of material that pertained to helping them in their warfare, for building aircraft and what have you. And during that, we found one survivor, and it just happened to be the captain of that ship's, his steward. And he was the only one that we found out that could speak some English. And with that, that's when we decided to look more for contraband. And we picked up some of the bales of the titanium and the rubber, and we brought that as evidence, which did not help us too much. So at that time, our skipper was awarded to go, that was not an award, but we call it that, a letter to be court-martialed. And as a witness, I was on the bridge, so I was called to the court-martial, and that was the end of that. Fortunately, I wasn't called, but I had to be there, and I missed the last cruise on the Queenfish. But at that time, after the court-martial, the skipper and myself, we were sent back to the States, and I was put in, assigned to Portsmouth once more, and put the Remora in commission. And basically that was, prior to the commissioning, just after the commissioning, the war was over. And I stayed in long enough for the Remora to make her shakedown cruise, because the skipper asked me, because of my experience with the Queenfish and through whatever she's been through, it would help him for me to stay aboard to train the new crew on the Remora. And basically that was about the time after the shakedown cruise that I resigned. And I put my 4 years in, and that was it. Just memories. I was one of the youngest when we got aboard, when we got commissioned. And of all that, the crew, I guess I'm the only survivor that's still alive and still be able to talk about it. But I just feel like I'm just another guy.
Mr. Dickinson is 91 years old and resides in Claremont, Florida. To learn more about the World War II Veterans History Project, please visit our website at WWII veteranshistoryproject.com. We look forward to seeing you again for more exciting stories from the greatest generation.